Okay, after some technical problems, welcome everybody. Welcome to my talk, What Users Want, A/B Testing Explained. First of all, thank you all for joining this talk. I know there are a lot of good talks happening at this time, so thank you for choosing this one. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Vladimir Dejanovic. This is my mail, blog, GitHub account, Twitter arrest if you want to contact me online. I'm part of professional IT scene since 2006. In other words, I'm getting paid for developing software since 2006, and I developed software in many programming languages, many frameworks, many technologies, basically, you name it, I did it. Also, I'm a founder and leader of Amsterdam Java user group. I'm also giving talks at conferences like this one. And I'm Java 1 Rockstar, because my talk was one of highest rated on the last Java 1, but because they changed the name to Oracle Code 1, they said, okay, now it's Oracle Code 1 Star, but what can you do? But enough about me. So what this talk is going to be about. First, we're going to talk about successful versus failure in old or traditional way of working, so to say. And basically, what's the difference and why some companies succeed, why others fail. Then we're going to talk about A/B testing and basically how A/B testing can help us in basically making sure that our company and our product is loved by users and that we of course succeed. Then I will spend some time talking about how you can actually fail doing A/B testing and also what are the limitations of A/B testing. At the end, I think there will be more than enough time for questions because I think it's like 1 hour. So we'll have more than enough time for questions, but if you have some question and you didn't manage to ask it, you can always ask me later. I'm going to stay here for the full conference, or you can contact me online at any time. So, have you ever wondered why, some companies succeeded while others failed, Especially if maybe they did very similar thing, One basically made the millions while other went bust, What was the difference between them? Well, the most easiest explanation is the successful company took potential clients, basically potential customers, and made them into paying customers. And let's be honest, this isn't an easy thing to do. It means that basically they had something that the customers were willing to pay, and to give money for it. I always say, the best possible way to know if what you build is good or not is actually ask for money, And if people are willing to give you the money and give you the money, well, guess what? Then you're doing good, right? Just continue doing that. All successful companies realized one simple thing, and that is that you must put always customer in the center of everything that you do. Because in the end, the customer will decide, if this is what you're doing good or not, because they need to give you the money. So if you don't build the software for your customers, but you say, oh, hey, look, this cool, feature or this cool like algorithm, customers don't care. You need to think about them first. But putting customer first is easier thing said than done, Even if you know this, the question is, but how to make sure that whatever you build is actually what customers want? Usually what it happens, with this is, okay, you have long meetings, and then everybody says, okay, like, I think the customers wants this, I think the customers need this, so let's build this, and basically everybody, make their point of view. Good thing about opinions is that everyone has one. And, of course, like everybody is going to defend their point of view and try to make it a group point of view. And of course, you're going to end up like this, sleeping at your desk. At least I am. As with all long discussions, everything, end up in a very similar way. He who shouts the loudest wins the argument. But we all know that that's not really the best approach, right? Besides this, we also need to be aware of the hippos running around. Anybody know what this stands for? Nobody. Okay. So the hippo stands for highest paid person opinion. For some reason, people who are paid the most think that they know the most, especially when it comes to, okay, what should be built, why, how it should be built, and all other stuff, and then they come to the meetings or just, they come to you and say, okay, you're going to build this because I'm the boss, I'm getting most money because I know what customers want, and, this is the way that we should do it. And I'm not sure about you guys, but in my professional career, this was proven to be wrong multiple times. Actually, it was in most cases very wrong. So be very aware about the hippo running around, and say we don't really care, how much you're paid or anything. Like, it doesn't mean that you know everything. So if long discussions is not the way, if the hippo is not the right way, then how do we know actually what users want? How can we actually figure it out? Yeah, if only we had like a crystal ball, right? Because if we had a crystal ball, then we could look into it, we could look into the future, see what the customers want, Imagine, making Google or Facebook, before the Google and Facebook did it, Well, not Facebook at the moment, but, Facebook before that, current time. But we don't have a crystal ball, right? So we have the best next thing, and that is data. We have huge amount of data. Just think about amount of data that we are producing every single day via social media, via search history. It's enormous. And what's becoming more and more obvious nowadays is that data means power. Whoever has the most data has the most power. That's why everybody wants is going into big data, machine learning, and all those kind of things. You need huge amounts of data to make that work. But having only the data is only half of a story. You still need to basically figure out actually how to use it in the best possible way, how actually to come to the results that you want. And this is where actually A/B testing come in place. A/B testing is a scientific way to actually figure out what users want and actually prove that that's correct one. So let's look at that. So, you can do A/B testing even without any data. You can just start right now for something and just say, okay, let's do A/B testing. But in that case, it's going to be more like a shot in the dark. So it's more likely that you're going to miss than actually hit. So it's much better, first, gather as much data as you can, and you're legally allowed. So gather information, okay, how users interact with your website, how they interact with your application, what they're doing, from which source they come to your application or website, actually how long they stay there, where they go, next. Gather as much information as you can, And once you get all this information that you can, then the next thing is actually creating a hypothesis and say, okay, I have all this data, I studied it, and I think if I do this, users will do that. So then we have a hypothesis, and now we need to basically scientifically approve or disapprove our hypothesis. And here's where A/B testing comes in place. So let's imagine we have an e-commerce website, because it's the easiest thing to follow. So, and let's assume that basically we have some page, and on that page we have a green button. And we think, okay, we think that if the button is red, the users are going to click more, and they're going to either buy more or do whatever we want them to do more. So what do? Well, then we make basically the page with a red button. Next thing is we send users to the both website with a green button, and to the page with the green button and the page with the red button at the same time. And the idea is that roughly 50% of people should see one, 50% should see other. So 50% will see green button, 50% will see red button, and then we just basically, continue to gather information. Okay, let's see, okay, how many saw what? Did they do what we wanted to do or not, Once we have all these numbers, after some time, we will basically have the data to say, okay, either the green button was better or the red button was better. Basically, we will have a winner. We will scientifically approve or disapprove if our hypothesis was correct. With data, in this way you can make all your decisions basically data-driven. Like I said, with opinions, everybody has their opinion. Everybody will fight for their opinion, to make it, stick. But you can't argue, with the data, So that's the beauty of it. So that's why all our decisions should be data-driven, Logic and data is a key, So why shouldn't we be using them? Why should we, rely on assumptions when we know that they are wrong? Booking.com, Amazon.com, and Google are just some of the companies that are using A/B testing for years to actually make their fortune, and they are still using it heavily because they know that it works. Okay, so now that we know that A/B testing is the way to figure out what users want, the next logical question is, but how do we actually do it? How do we build it? What's the blueprint? First, let's just agree on some terms so that we're all on the same page. So the original thing, the page, the web app, whatever you're doing A/B testing on, we'll call base or control group. So those are acronyms, basically any of those. Then the thing that actually differs from the original one is variant, and you can have more than one variant. It is called A/B testing, but you can have as many variants as you want. But just keep in mind, the more variants, the more complex the project is going to be and everything around it. So keep it as small as possible. All of this is going to be experiment. And usually when we do the A/B testing, basically we do A/B testing on some process. And you could think of the process as a funnel which consists of multiple layers. And basically, when a user visitors, basically when they come to see some process, they can go in and they basically go from a layer to the layer. The more complex process, of course, the more layers. And what you can also need to remember is that the user can actually leave the funnel in every layer. So that's why it also helps if your processes are very simple, because if it's simple, it means less layers, less possibility for a user to go out. Of course, not all users that see your basically process, your funnel, will end up on the other side. So some of them will, and we call them conversion. And basically, we have also conversion rate, which is actually percentage of the people who saw the process compared to the number of people who actually went through the whole process and did what you actually want to do. And majority of A/B testing actually is trying to increase conversion rate, whatever that process does. Okay, so let's see how A/B testing actually looks like. So everything starts, of course, with the user. User is going to come and hit the web page or the application, the mobile phone, whatever. At that point, we need to actually decide, okay, what we show to the user. Is it A or is it B? And we need a process of like a flip of a coin, which on a 50% chance gives A, 50% chance gives B. Once we know what the user needs to see, we show them A or B. And also important thing to remember is we still need to monitor everything. We need to monitor basically what the user is doing, what user saw, all this kind of information, and also persist it. We need to save it somewhere. Reason is very simple. If a user came to your website or page or whatever, and we show them A today, and they come tomorrow, and we flip coin again, and we show them the B, that's going to mess up with them. So we want consistent behavior. We want whenever same user comes, always to see the same data. That's why you need to remember and store it somewhere. Okay, what we show to this user, and basically always show the same result. Otherwise, you're going to mess up with your data. So the first thing that we need to build, of course, is a mechanism flip of a coin. Like I said, 50% chance for A, 50% chance of a B. It doesn't have to be perfect 50-50. It means that it should, roughly half of the users should be in the bucket for A, and half the user should be in the bucket for B. Important thing to remember, distribution like this needs to be only in the case that you can show only one experiment per page, per view, or whatever in your application. If your user can see more than one experiment at any time, for example, on the same page or in same mobile application, same view, let's say 2, then it needs to look like this. Basically, you need to split. So we have split A and B. This is the first experiment. Second experiment is A1, B1. We need to make all the combinations possible, and every possible combination of those two experiments needs to have roughly the same, buckets. Because what can happen, sometimes people forget and they don't have like distribution like this, and then, for example, let's say A is very heavy, all the users end up there. Then you have inconsistent data. With inconsistent data, basically all your data and experiment is going to be corrupted, and you can just throw your experiment away. So it needs to be balanced, not perfectly, but roughly. Again, like if we have more than 2 experiments, then we just continue splitting it more and more and more. And again, all the possible combinations of all experiments need to have roughly the same number of users seeing it. Another thing, like I said, is we need to basically store somewhere, okay, what kind of data a user saw, what kind of experiments did we show to them. If your users have to be logged in order to see any feature on your website or on your mobile application, then you're lucky, and you can basically tie all that information for their session, their user, without any problems. If you want for A/B testing to also work for anonymous users, so for public, then you really can't use that approach. In that case, what's usually done is you basically put a cookie to the user and basically put experiment information there. And basically in that way, when the user comes next time, they're going to send you the cookie with all experiments. You say, aha, here's all the information that basically I need to show to you. Keep in mind that if you go with this approach, and basically you have a lot of experiments, at one point you're going to hit a cookie limit size. So basically you will not be able to store any more experiments in a cookie. If you move to the headers, it's more or less exactly the same thing. It's going to be maybe a little bit, give you a little bit more breathing space, but not a lot. What in this case you need to do, and what's the best thing to do, is to actually have a server-side cookies. So what actually server-side cookie means is that in a cookie to the user, you just put an ID, some ID, and then user send that ID to you, and then on the back end, basically you get that ID and say, okay, I know for this ID, I have all these experiments, and then you basically set up everything. Of course, this is not a perfect solution, because if a user clears his cookies, you lost all information, but what you can do. Again, another thing, what you need to do, of course, is also change your website, your mobile application, to actually understand the A/B testing. So basically, if we're going to show like green or red button, you can do it in multiple ways. You can either render a complete different HTML page, or you can do it in a JavaScript. It's like different ways, but you need to actually do some modification so that your whole website, your application is aware of A/B testing, and also that it sends all the information that the actual users need. No user, but that you need to actually figure out, okay, what they saw and is it good or bad. So all of this is perfect, right? But how the hell do we know basically like if A or B is better? Well, here's where actually the math comes in help. Like I said, it's a scientific method. So what we need to do is, first of all, create a table like this. Very simple thing. And then we need to count all the users that saw A total. Then we also need to count all the users which actually saw the B total. When we have these two numbers, then it's easy to figure out, okay, what's the number of users that actually saw A or B? Then we need to see, okay, users that saw A, how many of them actually, did the action or whatever we wanted them to do? That's A, yes. How many of them didn't convert, didn't do the action that we wanted to do? That's A, no. And then the similar thing we do for B. How many saw the B and did the action that we wanted, converted, and how many, saw the B and didn't convert it? B, no. When we have these numbers, then it's easy to calculate total number of users that actually converted, did the action that we wanted, and the total number of users that converted actually didn't convert. Once we have these numbers, then actually the next step is just do the calculation. So let's look at that. So we need to calculate our expectations for users that saw A and will convert. And let's calculate in this way. A total multiplied by total of users who converted divided by total number of users. Again, expectations for users who saw A and didn't convert is as this. A total multiplied by total number of users that didn't convert divided by total number of users. And in similar way, we also have, how many users we expect for the B that, converted and for B that didn't convert it. So now we have all expectations. So now we can actually go to the next step. Next step is actually to calculate the G-test. And to calculate the G-test, we are going to use this formula. So 2 measured by logarithm of measure divided by expected. In case of A/B testing, and basically like only like one variant, it's going to look like this. So if, for example, we had more than one variant, of course, this formula is going to get longer. Also, all the other like previous tables, everything is going to get longer. So that's why I said, you can do all of this, for multiple variants, but more variants means more complication and more math and more everything. So keep it simple as much as possible. I think that so far all the math was very simple, right? Everybody can do this. It's like it's basic math. So now that we have G-test, we're going to use that as an input for chi-square probability test. And here we're going to actually calculate it by using the mathematical formula, and we're going to provide 2 values, 1 and G-test, and we're going to get chi-square probability, and we're going to get some value, which is 0 or 1, actually somewhere between 0 and 1, including 0 and 1. So now that we have this, we have all that we need to actually calculate significant difference. So what does significant difference means? Well, significant difference means that actually if we do A/B testing and we get to look at the results, we can say with certain certainty, okay, this really means that if we do change like this, users will behave in this way. If it's and let's see actually like how to calculate significant difference. So we just basically from 1 subtract the chi-square probability test P, and for example, if we get 0.95, it means that whatever we did in A/B testing, we can with 95% certainty say it's correct result. Then basically what you need to do is, okay, go and look, was more people converted for A or for B? And if more people converted for A, for example, then you can say, okay, with 95% chance, we can guarantee that with this experiment, A performs better. So we should use that one. Number of significant difference which you're going to choose to actually make, say, it's good or bad experiment, it's up to you. Just keep in mind, the higher probability, it's more precise, it's better result, you can be more confident, but also means that you're going to be needed more users and more time to actually reach to that number, and maybe you will never reach it. The lower the number, it means that you're more likely to basically random chance. For example, 50% chance means absolutely nothing. So keep it as high as possible. Okay, so now that we know basically that we need to use A/B testing to figure out what users want, and that's basically how we can actually build it and how we can actually do all the calculations. Let's look how can actually we fail at A/B testing and some of limitations. Sometimes people are confused by this and say, how can you fail with with something which is scientific? Well, human factor, like always. So the first thing first is, if you don't understand that not everybody who visited your website or page saw experiment, you're making a mistake right there. Because sometimes people, for optimization purposes, on first initial hit to the website or the app, wherever, they're going to do flip of the coin for all experiments and going to take them for all the calculations along the way. But that doesn't mean that that user also saw experiment. So usually what's the best thing to do is, whenever you do the flip of a coin, you also you need to set a flag. Okay, does this user see experiment which I'm interested or not? If it didn't see the experiment, don't take them along into calculations, or you're going to make mistakes. Other thing that also users very often make mistakes is distribution for multiple experiments, especially on the same page. Like I said, if on one page you can see 2 experiments, distribution needs to be like this. If distribution is not like this, then all the math that I showed you is going to be thrown out of the window. So that's very, very important thing to do. Again, another thing that how we can actually very easily fail with doing A/B testing is with actually when errors interfering. So imagine that you are starting an A/B test and maybe you introduce some error. Or maybe you just try starting A/B test, but somebody else introduced an error on your website. Well, guess what? Because of that error on your website or application, users are going to behave differently than they should, and that can interfere with your A/B testing. That's why you need to also gather information all the time, and if you see something like that, it's actually interfering there, basically your experiments, you need to restart experiments. Because basically you can, of course, first you fix the error, and then restart experiment, because all the data so far will be probably corrupted. Another thing that also users sometimes do is actually they're pausing experiments. And I can say only for this, never, 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 never pause experiment. Please never do that. Usually it comes from the business point of view, because business people say, okay, yeah, but we spent so much time to actually set up the experiment, and then basically there was some small typo or some small error or something like that. And then, who's going to basically do all the work again, for the experiment? So let's just pause the experiment, fix that problem, and then, continue doing the experiment. What actually what's going to happen is, okay, you have a user and he saw a variant, right? And he's seeing a variant. Then you're going to pause experiment, then that user is going to start seeing control. Then you're going to unpause experiment, and basically then he's again going to see variant, and he's going to say, okay, this website or application is broken, something is wrong here. So you're messing up with the data, you're messing up with the users, you're destroying everything. That's why please never, never pause experiment. If there is an error interfering with your experiment, stop experiment, fix all the problems, create a new experiment, and start all over again. So never pause experiment. I know the business people will not understand this and will really push hard for pausing experiment. Basically all the business people that I met so far pushed for this, but this is the worst thing that you can do with experiment, especially A/B testing. Again, the other problem how actually you can fail at A/B testing, and this is also a very common thing, is if you don't look at the whole process, Because what we usually do, if this is our process, right? When we do A/B testing, usually we do A/B testing on some small part of the process, right? So for example, here. So what can happen is, okay, you're doing your A/B testing, you say, okay, let's do this, and people are going to go, or everybody's going to go to the next layer. Basically, that's your definition of done. And what can happen is, look, everybody goes there, it's perfect. Let's put full on. But what can happen is you have issues here. So, for example, I used to work for Booking.com. And in the case of Booking.com, the gold metric is basically, conversion rate for the bookings per day. So any experiment that actually increased the number of bookings meant directly, okay, it increased the number of the money that Booking is making, and it means, okay, it's a perfect experiment, right? It should be full on and it should be as fast as possible because we want to make as much money as we want. However, there is other part of a process, and that's cancellation rate. So if you book a room, doesn't mean that you're going to go to that hotel. You can always cancel later. And basically what was happening, for example, is that some people were putting some experiments, and the booking was going through the roof, but cancellations were going even higher through the roof. So that's why you always need to know the whole process, the whole picture, even if you do A/B testing only a small part, how that affect the whole picture. Because in this case, there were more cancellations that actually were the booking, so it was actually hurting booking and not not producing the money. Another thing that again comes very often from business point of view is you stopping experiment too fast. So they put some experiment on, they see it's okay, it's like going perfectly, everybody's like happy with it, everybody's doing what they thought it was going to do. They say, okay, stop experiment and just put full on. We are going, this is like the new standard, it's perfect. Again, never do this. Stop experiments fast only if they're causing you a serious damage. In all other situations, just let it running. What is the reason for that? Well, let's imagine that this is the number of users visiting your website, you know? This is, for example, roughly how it looked for Booking.com. There were less users during the working days and more during the weekend. So what can happen is, you run your experiment here, and there are like small number of users, everything is perfect, you mean, okay, this experiment is perfect, let's put it on, and then the weekend comes, and then there's much more users, and the result of experiment can be completely different. But if you stopped experiments before this one, you will never know. So that's why, for example, in Booking.com, you know, there was a rule, you have to run experiment minimum for 1 week, because users behave in this way. There are different type of users during the working day and the weekday, and there was also different number of users. So that's why it was like minimum 1 week. If it wasn't 1 week, you couldn't, you know, say, okay, it's good or not. This one also shouldn't come as a surprise. Again, you know, you need to understand seasonality actually of your users. You know, do they for example, during the summer, people go more on vacation, you know. During the winter, basically, people more go to skiing resorts and things like that, you know. Also, for example, now, you know, with the Black Friday, you know, with shopping, you know, people are behaving differently. So you also need to take those kind of things into account when actually you're deciding if your experiment is perfect or not. You know, you need to understand, you know, the context in which it is run. Another common way that actually people fail at doing experiments is basically, you know, making a lot of changes in the same experiment. So if you remember, if we go back to my experiment that I mentioned, there was like, okay, there was a page, there was a green button, and there was a red button. So there was only one small change, just the color of a button, which means whatever happens with that A/B test, I can be 100% sure that it's only according to that color, that basically made it possible, you know, either good or bad. If you make billion of changes, you will have no clue, okay, if something of that was good, if something of that was bad. Again, in general, it might end up good, but again, it doesn't mean that all of those things that you made changes were good. Some or maybe of them were very bad. So that's why always keep experiments as small as possible, as little as possible, and then you can really know, okay, did this actually make a difference or not? Was it good or bad? Another also common problem with failing in A/B testing is that sometimes, again, business, unfortunately, they create the experiment, it fails, then they start, okay, looking at the data, okay, to figure out, okay, why it wasn't good, because they thought it's going to be good. Then they look at the data and say, aha, I know what's the problem. Basically, then change the experiment that they were doing, and instead of running experiment again, they just say, okay, according to the data, this is actually correct, and they just put it full on. Never do this. If you look at the old data, you can find proof for whatever you're looking always. If you have experiments, it failed, you looked at the data, you think that you know what was the problem with it, just create a new experiment and verify, you know, just like that. Don't use old data for the old experiment to actually, you know, prove or disprove the new experiment. Okay, so let's look now a little bit at limitations of A/B testing, because believe it or not, A/B testing is not a holy grail, it can't solve all the problems. So, the first thing, which actually is a huge limitation of A/B testing, is actually the number of users. Especially if you want high, you know, rate basically for being sure that it's actually significant difference or not, you need a lot of users. Which doesn't really help a lot if you're just starting. So it means you're going to be at the beginning like a chicken and egg problem, you know? You need to use A/B testing in order to, you know, make what users want, and in that case, basically, you're also going to get much more users. However, you know, without the users, you're going to need to wait for a long period of time. You're not going to basically be able to perform efficient A/B testing. So that's why I said it's like a chicken and egg problem. So, you know, if I just started with something new, I probably wouldn't start with A/B testing right away. I would basically try to actually ramp up as much as I can the old-fashioned way, basically, you know, with the user base and everything, and then slowly starting introducing A/B testing, and also maybe, you know, like put a lower, you know, threshold for significant difference. Because to get it really good and to be really precise, you need a lot of users. And again, that's very difficult without A/B testing. Another big problem with A/B testing is that you can't do big bangs. Again, like I said, when we do A/B testing, if we change a lot of stuff, we don't know how users are going to react. Imagine that you have a huge user base, and your users really love your website. If you change everything on it, users are probably going to hate it, at least at the beginning. So that's why, like A/B testing isn't really going to help you with, big changes. It's perfect with small changes, with modifications to the existing stuff, evolution and all those kind of things. But if you need to really make like complete redesign of the website and everything, you can just throw A/B testing out of the window, because the data that you're going to get, I can guarantee you, is going to be negative, unless you really, like made some huge, obvious improvements and things like that. But again, in that case, A/B testing probably isn't the thing that you need. Okay, so let's do quickly summarize. So basically, like I said, put customer in center of everything that you do. If you do this, basically, you're going to be better right off. Again, to figure out what users really want, that's going to be a little bit tricky. That's why you should be using A/B testing. I explained to you, okay, what A/B testing is from a theoretical point of view. I explained to you how actually you should build A/B testing and change a little bit for your website, also how we need to do calculations. We talked about the ways to actually failing in A/B testing, like using the old data, pausing experiments, stopping it too fast, not taking into account seasonality and all those kind of things. Also, we talk about limitations. Basically, you need the users in order to actually be able to actually use A/B testing efficiently. The more users you have, the better you have A/B testing. So it's kind of chicken egg problem. And also, there is a Big Bang theory basically behind the A/B testing. Thank you. Any questions? No? Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Can you repeat? What are the tools used for A/B testing? That's a long answer. So basically, like for example, in case of booking, Amazon and Google, I know that they built it themselves. So they really customize whole code base and their tools, everything around it. I know that there's a lot of companies which actually are selling A/B testing as a feature, and there are like different ways. So basically, in case of mobile applications, they give you like a library, and they say, okay, just include this library, and then basically there's some hooks that you put in your code, but you need to call their server, so they basically do all the calculations for you. Also, in case of the website, sometimes, again, if it's like third party, they give you like JavaScript libraries that you embed. So there are different types of systems. So again, like, they're like build your own, and there's basically commercial ones where actually you pay, and then they tell you, okay, like for our system, this is how it works. So it really varies. But also I know that, for example, now with the Istio, it's also coming like that you can actually do like A/B testing directly through the Istio. Not sure like how production ready is that part, but so does that answer your question? Yeah. Any other questions? Yep. Can you repeat? Okay, so the question. Okay, so the question is, if I understand correctly, if I would building something, would I basically go and buy something, or would I build it myself? That's a tough one, to be honest with you. All the companies that I used to work so far, which did A/B testing, basically they all build their own. In some cases, they build perfect things, like for example, Booking.com. Some other companies build terrible stuff. So, the problem in my mind with all the things that you can buy that I saw so far is basically they have a way that they think that it should be done. And if your process and everything and system actually can adapt to that one, you're in a perfect situation. But if, for example, you want to do something in most of them are actually just on a top layer, basically with user interaction, like user either like blue or green button, like move button left or right, things like that. But if you want to really change the process itself, depending on A/B testing, for example, that what we did in booking, and we really like completely changed the way that user can actually make the booking, and depending on if we were experiment, we showed him this process or we showed him this. For example, one of the experiments, if I remember correctly, was we don't charge first, but we basically let you do all the bookings, everything, and then like after some time, okay, ask you for the credit cards, things like that. So in that case, when you really need to change the process itself, all the tools that I saw doesn't support it. So that's the thing. If you want to do A/B testing only on the user interface layer, like I said, color, changing left to right, almost all of them outside that you can buy will be perfectly for that. If you want really to like change something deep in the system, they don't support that. So it again comes back to what's your use, what actually what you want to do, and how deep you want to go with the A/B test. Does that answer the question? Any other questions? Yeah. Okay, so the question is who should analyze the data? Well, it again comes back to how good the tool is. Because like, for example, in case of Booking.com, there was a dedicated team only for making that tool, and they made that tool very like idiot-proof. Basically, there was all with the colors and everything, so whoever actually ran the experiment would actually saw and see the data there. And you could see, okay, like, is it successful or not? Because in the end, that's the only thing that you want to do. If your experiment tool basically isn't very advanced, then probably somebody who actually understands more A/B testing. So again, in that case, maybe some data scientists, or again, somebody who actually understands what they're looking for. It really depends on maturity of the tool. In case of the Booking.com, basically everybody was just looking at it. But usually how it went was that 99% of the cases, product owner was the one who was clicking the buttons. Because in the end, like, they had the stories, and like developers will just develop the feature, say, okay, here's the feature, and you go do your stuff. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.